I'm really, really pleased to be speaking to you today, and thanks for taking the time to do this, because we are in such a difficult situation, but we must stay positive. Hopefully we've got something down the line post-Easter, and that's really, really important. I'm going to do 20 minutes or so when we're looking at aiming for outstanding physical education. I think that's the first thing. And then the second part, I'm going to come back and think about how we can reimagine moving forwards in PE and school sport. This is the whole point of this. Is it's a really, really positive approach to what we're doing, and I think that's vital. And you'll see what comes through afterwards is a question of trying to keep going at the moment, keeping PE high on the agenda. But the second part of the session will be about thinking post-COVID and what we can really do. So hopefully we can start to dream again. I'm also aware that some of you have maybe seen me talk about things before in the past, so I'm going to try to build on that rather than repeat it, but reinforce what we said before and move it forward slightly. So first off, my screen, is my screen moving? It's not moving on mine. What can somebody tell me what you can see, because my screen's frozen?
Steve, we've got a bullet point that says aiming for outstanding PE now and beyond.
Okay, that's fine. I think it's just the system's playing up somewhat, but I'll work through and I'll assume that it will work as I go through. So the first session then is about aiming for outstanding now and beyond. Hopefully you can now see my elephant, because my elephant in the room during this pandemic is something that's really, really difficult for us at this moment in time, and it's something we're having to fight again. And it's a bit of a disappointment, because that's our elephant in the room. Is we've got this out here at the moment. It's very, very difficult to start criticising Joe, because he's put his work on for schools. He's kept children active. He's been doing that for some time. He's restarted it again now, but it's very, very important that we understand that's not physical education. And I've just thrown in there now, because last week, and you may have seen some of his stuff already, I'm not sure if he still thought he was on stage, but Bez has thrown himself into the mix. And although it might be a little bit of fun to see him shaking his maracas and upside down on his head as the ones that I've seen, it is not physical education. And just to go back to say that Joe's work can support physical education, but it's not physical education. And that's key for us, because we are in a situation at the moment where if we don't tackle that and do something different and keep this high on the agenda, that will become the new norm. And you'll see later, I'll point it out, but I'm very concerned that particularly in the primary setting, that there will be some senior leaders that may think that Joe Wicks is PE, and we may get replaced with the press of a video. So we've got to fight that at this moment in time, and accept that Joe's work is complementary. So the poster here, as you'll have seen before, and it's available from the Association for Physical Education. It is worth pointing out that we need to bring this back, keep it out there. It's not something we look at and throw away. This really shows you the distinction between physical education, school sport and physical activity. School sport is almost parked at the moment, particularly during lockdown, because even those that are in school are not going to be playing, particularly doing school sport against each other, nor against other schools. Indeed, you can't do anything against other schools. But the physical activity side on the right is what we want to encourage all the time. It's something we should be doing. And if you were doing school sport, if you were doing physical education, you would be doing physical activity. But without thinking about the concept of learning, we will lose physical education. So the definition on the box, on the left-hand side in the box, is absolutely vital. And if you read through that, and then where you're struggling with SLT, get them to understand that. It's your job to advocate and show them that Joe Wicks is not PE. He's in the physical activity side. So if you look at that definition, it's planned progressive learning, which I was going to ask you to look through later, in school curriculum timetable time, and which is delivered to all pupils. This involves learning to move. That's key. We've got to learn how to get better at moving, and actually the things that will help us to be a better mover and become more physically competent, and moving to learn. In other words, if you unpick moving to learn, it means that you are trying to get something out of the movement that you do. So we must focus on, when we're doing an activity, it's not doing it for the sake of it, like you might be doing if you went to the gym and did a spin class where somebody shouted at you for good reason. But it's not there's not any learning in that. You have to be thinking about that, and that's absolutely key. So please get these definitions poster and use it and remind everybody around you of this. And this is more important than it's ever been because of the situation that we're in at this moment in time. And the importance at the moment is really highlighted here. If you look at UNESCO, right back from 1978, every human being has the fundamental right of access to physical education and sport, which are essential for the full development of his personality. And you can see how old that statement is, because you would not now be using the term his personality. We would have certainly changed that and improved the language in there. But what it does do is it shows you that's how long we've been saying this as a fundamental right. So PE should be on the timetable, and we shouldn't be using COVID as an excuse because it's a little bit difficult here. Ofsted's with us. This is pre-lockdown, and some of the findings that when some of the schools were back. Amanda Spielman they were doing, Ofsted at the moment have been doing, not at that time, they're not really inspections, they were collaborative conversations and visits to find out how COVID has impacted. And this was a significant statement, was to say that there was some real issues. There's been a decline in physical health among pupils, and returning to PE is important. So Ofsted believes that under the main education inspection framework, the one pre-COVID and what we'll be returning to, a broad and balanced curriculum is absolutely vital. So that's key to us, and that's something to remember, because we should never be afraid of Ofsted, but some people are. And if we actually want to use them as a little bit of a lever up, then why not do that? And what they found in the gap they found earlier on, that there were gaps in learning in the more practical subjects such as PE, and that's understandable, because those that have been working during that early lockdown would have been focusing on core subjects. And you'll see the latest announcements from the gov.uk website is that a broad and balanced timetabled curriculum should now be covered, so all subjects should be in there. And indeed, this morning at my daughter's secondary school, I've just received a letter to say this is what the timetable is. She will be following her normal lessons and so on. And that's important for us to do. And it's important for us to do that in PE as well, which I'll give you some hints as how we might do that during COVID afterwards. So mental and physical stamina reduced. Even when we went back to this after the initial lockdown, children were struggling to take part in some of the activities that they previously found quite easy. So they actually couldn't keep up with some of the tasks that we've been asked to do, nor could they concentrate for long enough. And the reports of negative impacts on mental health are quite wide now. And it really is important that we do tackle this. And the Association for Physical Education has recently launched a level 4, I think it was on the initial slides that we've got, a level 4 qualification that may be useful for you to follow up, because it really does look at how physical education can contribute in this invaluable area. And the last part, the social interaction, the fact that Ofsted were reporting that the social interaction has been a real problem actually indirectly shows you how valuable physical education is, because we are now missing that. And when you look at remote learning, as I'll point you to in a moment, there's a big weakness in remote learning because you're working on your own, and you don't usually do that in physical education. So putting that to some more tangible things as well, some pupils had actually gained weight over that time as well. So we've got some real gaps, and a lot of this probably could have predicted as a result of it, but getting that tangible evidence is helping us, and it really does show us how physical education is so important and why it should stay on the timetable, particularly post-COVID, but certainly now as well. So if we're thinking about planning this outstanding curriculum that we want, it's important now here, and this is the bit I'll start at the bottom of that slide. This is really exciting. Okay, so I want to give a really positive message here, because we're in this doom and gloom messages. I've stopped watching the news now because it's all bad news, I find. So I'm starting with this bottom part. It is exciting. Let's think post-Easter and think of next September and what our curriculum will look like. But there is no standard curriculum. And if in brackets in there, I could put, and the national curriculum is not a curriculum. It's a frame of reference for you to use, which we'll show you later. There is no off-the-shelf curriculum. So I would expect each one of you to have a different curriculum to meet the needs of your pupils in your school. That's vital to us. So there isn't an off-the-shelf one. So there's nothing wrong with having different curricula. And each one's bespoke, and the way you develop it is ask yourself the challenging questions and be really honest and go back to those questions after you've done your design to see if you're answering them in the affirmative. So that's important. Make the curriculum your own. Do not use one from a public domain. It is vital to own your own curriculum. And in many schools, the curriculum's been there 15, 20 years. Why is it like that? It just is. It's always been there. Have we thought through why we teach in that particular order? Have we thought through why those activities are there? Have we asked the pupils what they think about the offer that we're giving to them? If you've been in a school for a while, that may be the case. If you've only joined a school quite recently and you've been given the opportunity to oversee PE, don't be afraid to take it as a challenge and to think, I'm going to get hold of this now and go back to the drawing board, and you'll find some things are still there because they work, but there are some things that need a real revamp. I've picked out here some of the hallmarks from the National College that they said about that makes a great curriculum. And this is generically, and if you think about this as the whole school, but then bring it down to the level of physical education to think, how does it apply to us? Start to think about those types of things, because I'm turning them into questions later, but start to think about those things yourself and think, well, where are we with that? Do you know why you're doing PE? What's the aims, values, and purpose? So we have to ask ourselves the questions. If we don't know why we're doing it, we can't see if we're being successful or not. Does the whole person get developed? So physical education, we're seeing through this pandemic, makes a significant impact on the whole person themselves. Is it broad and balanced and has clear progression in subject knowledge and skills? And that's a very interesting one. So if we take it down to physical education, is it broad and balanced, or have you got too much games going on? So sometimes when you turn that into percentage tables, you think, oh, we're doing invasion games, striking, net. Well, they're all games. So let's think about how we do that, and how do we know what progression looks like? So what things are we doing at year 6 that are different to what we did with year 2? So we should be able to say and explain why it's more challenging. First-hand purposeful experiences. We want to be in the practical, we've said that. It's responsive, so your curriculum is a framework and you make it meet the needs of your students. It's got some sustainability in there that gives us questions about the use of coaches for using primary funding, which I won't touch upon at the moment in this angle. It's got an eye on the future and the needs of future citizens, and that's the big one for us, because bearing in mind what Liz was saying about the data, then our future is we need to get people more active, and you need to leave them with the skills to make those right decisions. So they might not quite be making at the end of primary school, but by the end of secondary, when they're no longer in that formal education with formal PE lessons, all of us should have made a contribution that makes them lead into and lead healthy, active lives. And that's actually in the framework as well. We all do make a contribution for that. It's in the education inspection framework. And next point is about using expertise beyond the curriculum. So if you are using coaches, other people, you make them meet your needs. That's vital. What are the links between the other subjects? Can we talk about some of the issues when we're doing pulse rates, when we're talking about muscles? How does that link to the science curriculum? Sometimes we can match those things together. And that last point here really draws out that it is about making it yours as well. So you can talk about national issues, international issues, you can bring things from around the world in, but your local environment matters as well. So what's important in your area, and can we build it into our thinking? Now, we're coming up to the end part. We're slightly in front, but we're coming up to the final slide of this part of the session. And this is where I really want you to start to think and to challenge yourselves. And I've probably shown you this before. We designed this about a year ago as a result of some of the presentations that we've been doing over the time. But these are questions to ask when you are designing your own curriculum. And the way I've been using this now, and I'm developing resources around this, is that the first way to do this is to use this as the starting point of your self-evaluation. So you think about your present position, and what you need to do if you're using these questions is to be very, very honest, and then be prepared to give yourself a really negative answer so that you can move on. And what we'd hope is that you would revisit this at the end of your thought processes and the end of your planning, and you'll be able to answer the more positively after you've done it. So it's a useful pre and a post one, but it does require real honesty for you to take this. And this, again, it is available from the Association of PE's website. You haven't got it. So the first thing, the question you would ask yourself is, and it's not on there, it's beyond that, when was the last time you had a physical education review? Some have done it because of the new framework, great. Some have not done it for a long time. And if you did it because of the new framework, do you still need to do it again? Because have you asked yourself the right questions? Now, if you've simply changed your activities, which I will pick up after in the next part of the session, if you simply change your activities, then in that situation, you may not have done a full review. You need to ask the question, the core purpose, rather than just changing activities. So, first question on there, is the planning you undertake consistent with the whole school approach and aligned to your overarching school curriculum philosophy? Ofsted use the terminology systemic, because if you ever get a deep dive, they'll want to see that you've got a system in place and you are linking to the whole school. That's absolutely vital, that you are linking to the whole school. So that's why your SLT and your head teacher should, in particular, and your governors, should all be on board with what you're trying to do. Gone are the days when the head teacher on an inspection would say, okay, physical education, go and talk to such a person. They should be able to tell you that as well. So is your physical education curriculum well planned or a series of piecemeal events? Now, what I mean by that is, if you've got games and then you've got some gymnastics and you've got rugby as part of your games, and you maybe have tag rugby in there, and then maybe you've got some short tennis in there, where it may be, how do they move and progress? What you need to think about is the learning that should be taking place over the period of time, and then thinking about the activities that can be used to support that learning. And if you go back to looking at, if you were to break the curriculum down, as you may have heard before, into heads, hearts and hands, for example, where the heads is the thinking part, the hearts is all about yourself and me, and those aspects such as resilience and competitiveness and those type of areas, and the hands are the metaphor for the skill. If you think at least in those three areas, how do you progress in each of them? So going back to the previous example, so that the year 2 is doing more challenging work than the year 6 student, and actually is looking more developed as they go through. That's key. And then you can say, in order to achieve this learning, we will use these activities. And that does require a lot of thinking, in fairness, to get to that situation. So the next question is, how do intent, implementation, impact link together in your story? Now, those words, intent, implementation, and impact, are for Ofsted in the framework. And if you don't want to use them, you do not have to use them. I know some schools have been a little bit obsessed with them because they're in there, and perhaps understandably. What it means, though, is if you don't want to use those words, what are you planning and how are you trying to develop? What are you trying to develop an intent? The implementation is the structure and the processes. It's the pedagogy that you use, and it's the way the timetable is constructed. And the impact is knowing and monitoring to see if you're making a difference. It's just a research cycle, and it would be basically good teaching. Does your curriculum have real breadth? Go back to that question I said before about the activities. You may want to look at your activities, break it down, and do some pie chart analysis. And you may be surprised at what you see, that there might not be enough dance in there, for example. So is it sequenced? Is it scaffolded? So that, you know, it is getting progressively harder in each of those areas we talked about. Is it inclusive? Has everybody got the opportunity to achieve, and how do you know? And particularly thinking about the SEND pupils, because they are explicitly mentioned in the education inspection framework. There's not too much mention of different groups in this framework, but SEND is still in there. So you need to say, well, how are they achieving? How do I know? Am I using pupil voice and questioning and am I looking at the difference between the achievement of different groups? Are you narrowing the curriculum for SATs in this instance? Does happen. The timetable gets closed down. We start to say no PE for 6 weeks before Christmas because we've got performance coming up. We need to stop that practice. You help them to learn the curriculum. So really that national curriculum has to come to life, and you have to say we've covered all the essential content in there as a bare minimum. And are they ready for the next stage of education? So as an example here is your early years students, are they ready to go into Key Stage 1, into the more formal setting that physical education may look like? Have your Key Stage 1s got ready for Key Stage 2? And your Key Stage 2s, are they secondary ready? So have you prepared them and done a good enough job so they can go into access the physical education in secondary school? Are they world ready? Can they handle, have they got creativity? Have they got curiosity? Have they got enough resilience? Have you given them the ability to that bounce back when they perceive some form of failure? Is assessment used effectively and not burdensome? That's quite interesting in the sense that in the past we couldn't comment on that in terms of inspections. It's now in the framework. So you might need to revisit the way you assess students. We don't need to be doing data drops every few weeks on physical education. It doesn't make sense. And again, we've got lots of training and help and support to do that should you need to do that. And as I said earlier on, it's absolutely vital that your SLT and governors are aware of and on board with physical education curriculum. That's vital because they need to know that difference. And sometimes I speak to governors who will say things like, oh yes, we love sport in this school, but actually that's not, looking at those definitions earlier, that's not the point. You can have a great attitude to it and a value to sport and physical activity without actually knowing what the purpose of physical education is. And that's the equivalent to saying, we love adding up in this school to explain maths. It's not the same thing. So really look at ways in which you can do that. And I'll try to give you a little tip in the second part of this session that will help you to develop a way of actually getting them to be able to understand what it is you actually do. And in the Education Inspection Framework, it talks about CPD or professional learning, that in the subjects, there should be an opportunity to develop and put on professional learning for teachers in the subjects themselves, because in the past too much of it has been around generic things like behaviour management, etc. Whereas that's important, we also need to keep investing in PE CPD and, for example, using the PE and Sport Premium effectively to make sure we've upskilled and left our students in a really good position. So that's it for me. I think hopefully I've given you a lot of things to think about, and there will be questions, and I'm sure you have to think about actions. And in the second part of this, I will try to reframe it and give you some little pointers as to things that you might be able to do. So that's it for me for the first part. That goes on there. I'm going to take us back a little bit more to the strategic element, because it is important to keep it all into parameters of what is it we're trying to achieve here. You know, we are trying to use physical activity, but we're trying to educate through the physical. So this is an opportunity to reimagine, and we're talking about now the COVID times. We'll still look at that, but also next time round. So that's absolutely vital. And looking at the sort of things I've outlined on the left here, is that it is very, very important that you plan your curriculum and your extracurricular activity, which are actually all the same thing. It's all about your offer with your ideal in mind. Easy to say at this moment in time, but that's very important. We need a long-term big picture, and then you adjust as required at the moment for COVID. So what you can't do at the moment, you adjust for COVID. That's when those students are in school. But at the moment, the adjustment may be just using some form of remote education for those who are not in school, which is a significant proportion. and avoid a COVID PE curriculum becoming the new norm. And that is the big concern. As I said before, that the Joe Wicks type work, if we're not careful, that could be the answer, and it's surely not. He has to supplement what we're doing. And for those of you that have ever followed the work of Lee Childs and read the Jack Reacher books, hope for the best, plan for the worst. That's what Jack Reacher uses as he's the big hero in all the books, and that's his statement. And I think it's we can't do anything wrong by using that as our guideline, you know, as a starting point. Even though Tom Cruise is about my size, and he's at least a foot too small to play Jack Reacher, but that's a side issue. So really do plan for your ideal. That's a key message here. And just a reminder, as I did allude to before, that an activity map is not a curriculum map. That's your offer. We need to present things in form of learning. So what is the learning we expect at various stages? And one of the things I suggest as we go through just towards the end of this now is that we will be asking, maybe, can you do an infograph, a big one-page infograph? And I've seen many schools do them around in different subjects. Can we do it for physical education that highlights the learning and the expectations in each year group, and not just the curriculum map? Now, this activity map would sit beneath that. It's the type of things that we're doing. And if you look at this example here, it focuses often on skills. And that's only about a third of what we do. Bearing in mind thinking and the development itself for some of the other areas, it's really important. And when you look wider than skills in physical education, you'll find that your children, and they should understand as well, that they're better than they think they are at PE in some situations. So somebody who's not particularly skillful, however much you will push them and try to get them to be skillful and keep working on it, they may still not reach the heights that they would expect, but they're making a great thinker. They will be able to be a great coach. They can really think about solutions. They can lead, officiate, plan and come up with great ideas, and then be a great encourager. There's a whole range of things that they can also offer. And once you bring that into the equation and think about all those things, you're giving reward to the other behaviours that we might expect beyond the skill development. And then just a little reminder here that when you bring in new activities, which is fantastic to bring them in, it's about needs and not wants. Okay, so it's not just, I want to do this new activity, can we do it? Think about it, bring it into a logic. And if it was about want, bearing in mind some of the schools, and I'm from the Manchester area, so if you said to them what you want to do, sometimes it'll be 5 to 6 years of football and nothing else. So it's about bringing, using that information you have, but doing what's right from a needs-driven basis. We did publish in 2011, and it's still relevant, a book to show the wider things that physical education can contribute to. So In Deep Learning to Learn is still available for anybody to purchase if you want to look at it. It's been developed based on the work around, for example, the University of Bristol's work and Guy Claxton's work on learning to learn, and that we bring out and apply it to a physical education context, looking at how you can develop creativity, curiosity, resilience, learning and relationship. And in the final chapter, we give some examples, and usually when I've shown this to teachers, those examples we give are just a springboard, because you've got far more ideas and a lot more imagination than we had when we were writing this, and it's just a prompt. So it's something worth thinking about if you want to think, how does physical education contribute to these wider areas, in particular the hearts side of physical education. So if we're planning our ideal curriculum, now this is what we said, it's let's think Easter, maybe let's be more realistic and say September. Our ideal curriculum that we're developing, I still want you to think of, because it's in the education inspection framework, physical education contributes to spiritual, moral, social and cultural development. It's been around for 20 odd years now, and it's still there, and it is massively, massively important. And I don't think there's a subject that can make the claim to make such a contribution to all 4 areas. And there is a paper by Brian Blake, and I brought it up, by 1994, for the bulletin of PE, and it's before afPE's time. It's when they used to be called BALPE, and I'm pretty sure I've got a copy of that, which I'll get over to afPE so they can circulate at some point. And Brian Blake's paper really makes the case, shows you how you can develop those 4 areas using physical education. And even this long on, how far we've gone now, it's still a very, very useful paper. So remind ourselves of the importance of that. And don't forget the national curriculum. My challenging question to you is, do your staff all know and understand the national curriculum? Have they ever been asked to read the 2 pages for the primary angle? Have they been asked to read it? Have they been asked to interpret it and dig beneath it? 2 pages doesn't mean it's nothing. 2 pages means it's actually a significant piece of work, and we have to really dig beneath it. And it's a great explanation on the right hand side here, is that the national curriculum is a set of ingredients, if we think of it in terms of baking a cake, and then the school decides how those ingredients are put together to make it exciting and effective. And then you also consider, what other things do I want? So as a benchmark, that's the starting point, and Ofsted in their inspections carry around with them the national curriculum. So even a non-specialist inspector will be asking you to talk about and explain how you are using the national curriculum, and that applies to academies as well, because even academies with their flexibility and freedoms are still being asked to use the national curriculum as the benchmark of a good curriculum. So think about how you use that national curriculum document. Now, starting the planning process, this is just to finish off really and round off what we've talked about before. This is and I've written this, if I was now leading the subject in a primary school setting, this is what I would do. This isn't to say it's what you should do. It's me thinking and bringing it all together to say, well, okay, mechanistically, what would I do now? I'd start with that national curriculum document, as I just said then, and I'd do what I just came through. I'd scrutinise the whole school aims, mission and intent. I think about what we've got written up there as our mission, what's on our website, what's on our whole school documents. I really want to know what they are so I can contribute to it. Because that next part coming down, the 3rd point, is deciding how we can contribute to the whole school intent. And that's where we need to get the SLT on board, isn't it? I keep saying that, and that's vital. It's PE is a whole school thing. Are there any subjects you can work with to share coverage of essential topics? Can I speak to the science lead and decide, and can we do that? And there are others. I use science as one example, but what work can we do together? Can we line it up so we're doing the same things and reinforcing it at different points, at the same points in a year? There may be that thinking around it. Decide the endpoints and key markers of learning. So if we're thinking about heads, hearts and hands, what are we expecting our children to look like? I use that inverted commas, look like at the end of our stages, but we don't want to be using assessment where you're recreating levels and a whole series of numbers. We just want information to know where they're at and that we can make that useful. And once more, if you're interested in assessment for learning, support and training, afPE's got some great tutors who can do that with you. This is what I suggested before, creating this curriculum overview with a learning journey, like an infograph of learning, but not an activity map. And I've been working with some colleagues who are trying this out now, including in the secondary sector. They're finding it quite challenging, but quite interesting to actually have to say, can we present it? Because once we do that, we've got our starting point, our big picture of what it looks like, and it will be displayed around the school. Agree this overview with key staff. So all your staff need to understand it. All teachers need to be on the same page, because if you're going back to inspection, if you're inspected and you were teaching a PE lesson, the inspector would say, how does it fit in with the sequence and the scheme of work and what you're trying to achieve? And they'd expect you to articulate that. And they'd expect the head teacher to articulate that. Not necessarily micro objectives, just roughly, at this moment in time, when you walk through this door, you'll see this activity is happening. And the big focus is, maybe it's on working in groups and developing, evaluating, improving today, or something like that. As long as you understand the big picture part, that's what we're looking for. And then, can you get some time on the agenda so that you can present your approach to the senior leadership team? And that's actually a good way of doing it. Can you get the voice on the governing body? Will they give you 15 minutes to say, this is PE and this is how we do it? And if you've got this right, the SLT should be able to explain your PESPA offer back to you. And if you've got a good relationship with them, or if you've not and you want to challenge them, just say to me, now I've told you all this, can you explain PE, school sport and physical activity back to me? And if they can't, you've still got some work to do. And in the best schools, they take that challenge on board, and they'd work with you to do that. And then your schemes and units that you have, they can sit beneath your big picture learning journey. Because what we have, once you rewrite that, you may find that you need to write your schemes and your units to reflect heads, hearts and hands, as an example. You want to reflect the learning, and that's why often off-the-shelf schemes, as which right back to the beginning, they tend not to work. If you're using off-the-shelf purchase schemes of work and units of work, they can be used as the starting point and benchmarks, but you adapt them to the needs of your curriculum. So, you know, that's how any purchase schemes and units should work. And obviously a key challenge would be helping students, parents and other staff to understand your approach. Once you've got this, we need to share it. We need to tell people exactly what we're doing and why. And I would add on to that, celebrate it. But my final part would be, once I've done all this, is to think, how inclusive is it? I've written this big picture for my whole school. Am I missing anything? And how do I know? And a good way of doing that is through student voice, constant student voice. You can do it through surveys, but you can also do it through having a school panel, whatever option you go down that route, but just constantly listening to them and seeing what they say. Now, just to finish off here, but during the COVID period, just so we don't end up with the press the video, that is the answer that I said before, there are two very good examples of things that you can use for remote education. Under gov.uk, last week, the week before, I think it was, the lockdown guidance came out, and it is now in law that you should be offering a broad and balanced curriculum for those students at home. So realistically, we're trying to do physical education as well, and the focus should not just be on English and maths as it may have been during the first lockdown. And there's two very good places to go to. The excellent work we did with supporting North Yorkshire Sport on the This Is PE campaign last summer, the website clips are still useful, very, very useful, because they are PE activities where you teach through the activity and you learn to think and challenge yourself and so on. They're very useful. They're only 2 minutes clips though, so you may exhaust those quite quickly. The second part is some work that we've been supporting at the moment is Oak National Academy. I'm sure you've heard a lot about that recently. They focused last summer on the core subjects, and there's thousands of lessons up there now, but with the other subjects are coming on board, and Association of PE has been working with them, and we are developing PE lessons that are going up, and those PE lessons are probably end of January, beginning of Feb. They'll be launched in batches, and I think the first ones to come through are going to be some gymnastic activity ideas and some athletic ideas, and the other ideas are to follow. But you must keep in mind that there's a massive weakness in a lesson. We'll never be happy with it, but it's better than what's out there, is that we are asking students to work on their own and in a very small space, either indoors or in a small space outdoors. So it's very, very difficult what we can do in that, but we're having a real good go at trying to do it. And hopefully when you see it, it will be useful. And the nice thing about them is that if you did use it and it's a 20-25 minute lesson, you should be able to press play on the video in the short term, and that would work because you know you've got the confidence that they've been developed for that moment in time, and your next 3 lessons would follow as well. So that is when you can press a play if it fits in with your curriculum. And hopefully that will be a real support for you, bearing in mind the weaknesses and the problems we've got at the moment with, you know, obviously just doing physical education in a room. And what it does show though is that we do actually miss a lot because we're not doing everything we can do in PE. It shows you how much good work we do in PE because we still can't do the social aspects even when we're working at home. And then to finish off for you, obviously from the afPE's point of view, on the right hand side here, if you haven't already purchased Safe Practice in PE, it was produced beginning of this year. It will last for another 3 years. I certainly recommend that is the way to go in terms of doing this. It's an essential resource every school should have. And afPE is the subject association and the go-to place for guidance. So feel free to get through the website, get your membership up because you'll obviously get all the support you need, including the health and safety line. And the membership details are on there should you need it. So very, real whistle-stop tour there. I would just say, just as a finish, thank you for what you're doing. Do have a look at what I just said for the COVID times. Keep championing physical education, and we're there to support you. And if anybody has watched Early Doors, the program from 15-20 years ago, I would just say there, to the regiment, and you'll know exactly what I would mean. And if not, you'll go and look at that on the internet. Okay, thank you for all your work.
Hi all, and just want to thank Steve on behalf of us as SGOs and partnerships, and obviously all the schools on the call, for your time and insight today. I'm sure everyone will agree the opportunities for reimagining PE now and beyond and post-COVID are substantial, especially with a new curriculum framework and flexibility that gives. But today's session will hopefully provide a platform for your future planning and preparation. And just before we let Steve go, we have had a couple of questions come through, one of which I know you've just answered quite thoroughly in terms of how do you propose to teach physical education and not physical activity. So I guess for me, it would just echo your point about the This Is PE videos and accessing those and tailoring them to your online learning. What I would like to ask Steve, though, is with the late announcement for this academic year's PE premium and how late in the day that came before summer, do you have any suggestions for primary schools on how to ensure that there's sustainability with their current spend moving forwards?
You're probably asking the wrong person there, in the sense that Sue Wilkinson is the expert in this. However, what I would say is that you should be using the funding still in as strategic an approach as possible. And I would encourage you to be really thinking about curriculum development and curriculum design. And it may be that some of the things that you had in mind in your original spending, like certain types of training, for example, they can't be accessed anymore. So you may need to reconfigure. So as long as you go back to the outcomes from the premium itself and stay within that, a reconfiguration would certainly be useful. But I would concentrate on what are the things that you can do at this moment in time in a remote setting that will still allow you to continue some of the work. And it seems like the thing I was talking about here, accessing curriculum development training, really working on developing the curriculum, through as a strategic big overview, that would be a great starting point, because they did allow you to carry on the overspend from last year. But even then, because I've now got another national lockdown, it is difficult to spend again. So we'd have to wait for a new message to see what they do about spending. But in the short term, I think it's the thinking about what can you do online. Is there any training that you could use? I mean, the example from the staff, the level 4 well-being training, and I talked about before, may be something you want to do, because when we do get back to some form of normality, there are going to be a lot of students really needing help. So if you can upskill yourself in how that will help, that would be it. But my advice would be just to say, pick up the strategic hang of it, because some of the training you want to do around specific activities may not be able to happen anymore.
Great, thank you. And the final question before we move to the local area updates. So we did a poll about the PE curriculum review and how often schools on the call have done that. Around 45% said they've done one within the last 2 years. Is there a set time frame you'd recommend in terms of running an annual PE review, possibly?
I think that'd be, Alex, I think that'd be a really good suggestion, as being an annual one. There's no set amount. Where it is more of a concern, perhaps, is when somebody hasn't done it for years, for whatever reason. But if you've done it recently, every time you hear new information, and even though you've done it recently, you might hear things today that you say, we didn't quite cover that in our review. So I think as a minimum, I would say once per year review, and in that review, getting as many people involved, including teachers and senior leaders, in that review as possible, so that we do it, so we give it the sense of time and the amount of time dedicated to it. And I think the one advantage of this lockdown as such, which isn't, because we know teachers are still working, it's given us a lot of different challenges, is there may be some time in there now to do the planning that previously you said you wouldn't have had. you know, and that might be an advantage of using some of the funding for that to do some of the planning and really go down to say, because we always say, if only we had the time to do this. And I often defend teachers because I say it's very difficult for you because tomorrow or immediately you're just teaching again and you can't think. Maybe now, because we've got this opportunity to reflect, we can use that time to try and get some long-term thinking going. An unintended consequence, I think I might say.
I think I can speak on behalf of all the other partnerships. The fact that we're not running events allows us to have more time in supporting schools with that. So please do get in touch with myself or the other partnership managers if you are looking to do a curriculum review in the coming terms this academic year. So that does bring the main session to a close. So thank you once again, Steve, for your time and your presentation this afternoon. In the chat function, you should see a link to a local school update for East Riding schools and the Get Ahead partnership. Hull schools and those in North East Lincolnshire, you will have a PE network meeting coming up towards the end of this half term. So there'll be something separate following on from this afternoon. So please check the chat for links if your schools have got a local area update. If not, thank you for joining us on the call this afternoon. We do appreciate your time, especially on a Friday, and we hope that we can see you soon. Thank you very much.